We walk around all day, um, basically assuming we're sending these crisp, high-definition messages to the people around us.
Right, like a perfect broadcast.
Exactly. We think our words and, our feelings and intentions are just transmitting perfectly, like a flawless Wi-Fi signal. But when you really look at the mechanics of human interaction, it is, well, it's rarely that clean.
Yeah, not even close.
It's really less like a clear text message and more like, I don't know, an encrypted radio broadcast playing over a massive amount of static.
That is a great way to put it, because the gap between what we project and what someone else actually receives is, it's profound. And most of the time, we operate completely unaware that this gap even exists.
Which is why
It is. So today, we are going to decode the unsaid. We're looking at the signals you broadcast without realizing it, how to read the hidden cues of the people around you, and eventually, why even the most advanced artificial intelligence models are currently just failing completely to read between the lines.
And to do this, we are pulling from a really fascinating stack of sources for this deep dive. We've got cognitive psychology research from the Decision Lab and Psychology Today, cross-cultural guides from the IFAS extension and Think Cultural Health, plus clinical mental health protocols from Supportive Care, and a really cutting-edge AI benchmarking study called the MMSU.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is, yeah. But before we can understand how people misinterpret our signals, we first need to confront a massive blind spot. Like, we have to look at our fundamental everyday assumption that people can essentially read our minds.
Right.
So, to set the stage, I want you to imagine a woman named Priya.
Okay, so let's say Priya is about to pitch a creative idea to her executive team. She's super well prepared, but she is just terrified of public speaking.
Oh man, I've been there.
Right. So as she's presenting, she's sweating, her heart is just hammering against her ribs, and she is absolutely convinced that everyone in the room can see her anxiety. She looks around, sees her colleagues looking down at their phones, and she immediately concludes, they know she's bombing.
But according to the cognitive psychology research we have from the Decision Lab, her colleagues actually perceive her as highly articulate, like very composed.
Exactly.
They're simply looking at their phones because they're engrossed in their own separate agendas.
Yeah.
What Priya is experiencing here is called the illusion of transparency.
Right.
It was coined by psychologists Dale Miller and Kathy McFarland, and later expanded by Thomas Gilovich. And it's basically this egocentric bias where we vastly overestimate how much other people can perceive our internal thoughts and emotions.
Yeah, we feel like our inner turmoil is glaringly obvious, but the science shows this is a complete illusion. And the neurological mechanism driving this, it basically comes down to cognitive anchoring.
Okay, explain that.
Well, your brain has finite processing limits. So because you are so acutely aware of your own internal state, your racing heart, your specific worries, that state takes up an enormous amount of your cognitive load. You're anchored to it.
Okay, let's unpack how that actually feels in practice. It's kind of like wearing noise-canceling headphones, right? Blasting your absolute favorite playlist and assuming everyone else on the bus is vibing to the exact same beat.
That is exactly it.
The music is so loud to you, you naturally anchor your perception of the entire bus to that internal feeling.
And adjusting away from that anchor requires immense cognitive effort. Like, to accurately imagine what a neutral observer is actually seeing, your brain has to purposefully suppress its own vivid reality.
Which is hard.
It's incredibly difficult. So the brain just defaults to assuming transparency. It's just easier.
And this was beautifully demonstrated in Elizabeth Newton's famous 1990 Tapper listener experiment at Stanford. Right?
Oh, I love this study.
Yeah, so the Tappers were asked to drum out the rhythm of a well-known song, like Happy Birthday, on a table. Then they had to predict how often the listeners would correctly guess the song. The Tappers confidently predicted a 50% success rate.
But the actual success rate for the listeners was a mere 3%.
Wow, just 3%.
Yeah. The Tappers were experiencing what's called the curse of knowledge. They could not unhear the full orchestral accompaniment playing in their own heads to realize that, to the listener, it just sounded like a random, disconnected series of taps.
And Yilovich and his team found the exact same bias when they had people drink this, like really foul-tasting red liquid, and try to hide their disgust. The participants were absolutely certain everyone in the room could see the revulsion.
But the neutral observers usually couldn't tell the difference at all.
But wait, I want to push back on the framing of this for a moment. Why is this universally labeled as a bias or a trap? Isn't the brain just, attempting to be honest and align our internal reality with our external environment?
Well, it is a tempting alignment, sure, but the framework is flawed because operating under this illusion actively damages our performance and our well-being.
How so?
Think about Priya in that boardroom. Her false belief that everyone could see her anxiety actually amplified her sympathetic nervous system response, which made her even more stressed. Or, if you assume your partner knows exactly why you're upset, you don't verbally communicate the issue, which leads directly to resentment.
Right, it creates this feedback loop of unnecessary friction. But the clinical data show something incredibly empowering here. Simply knowing about the illusion of transparency actually neutralizes it.
Yes. In 2003, researchers asked a group of people to deliver impromptu public speeches. Naturally, they all felt extremely nervous. But they took half the group beforehand and explicitly taught them the mechanics of this bias.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they were told, you will feel more nervous than you look. Your anxiety is not leaking out as much as you think.
And what happened?
That informed group not only reported feeling less anxiety during the speech, but the audience actually rated their deliveries as significantly better and more composed. Just the awareness changed their cognitive output.
That is so cool. The moment you realize people cannot hear the song playing in your head, you stop wasting energy trying to mask it.
Exactly.
Which means if your internal monologue is hidden, the people around you are forced to rely on external data points to figure out what you mean. And they pull that data almost entirely from your physical body. Because research shows that 60 to 65% of interpersonal communication is entirely nonverbal.
Right. And since the early evolutionary research by Charles Darwin and later the psychologist Paul Ekman, we've known that core facial expressions are biologically hardwired.
Right, Ekman proved this by traveling to isolated tribes, didn't he?
He did. Tribes with zero contact with the outside world. And he found they recognized the exact same facial expressions for happiness, anger, fear, and disgust as someone living in modern-day New York.
So these aren't learned cultural habits. They are biological reflexes that evolved for survival. And this is exactly why clinical mental health protocols, like the ones from supportive care, rely heavily on tools like the facial action coding system, or FACS.
Yes, FACS is fascinating.
Clinicians don't just look at a patient's overall demeanor. They break down facial movements into specific muscle groups to spot the difference between a constructed emotion and a biological one.
The classic example here is the difference between a polite, fake smile and a genuine Duchenne smile.
Right.
A genuine smile involuntarily engages the orbicularis oculi muscles around the eyes, creating that subtle crinkle.
Yeah.
You can consciously command the muscles around your mouth to curve upward, sure, but you cannot easily feel that eye contraction unless you are genuinely experiencing joy.
And even when we actively try to suppress a negative emotion, the biological override often kicks in anyway, resulting in what clinicians call micro-expressions.
Right, those involuntary flashes.
Yeah, they last for just fractions of a second. So if a clinician is evaluating a patient, they might hear the patient say they're doing fine, but simultaneously observe a flat affect, minimal head movement, or, a micro-expression of despair that totally contradicts the verbal report.
Because the physical body acts as a secondary, much older communication system. It is continually trying to broadcast the truth, often circumventing our conscious filters entirely.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting to me. If these micro-expressions are biologically hardwired, and they're universal across the entire human species, shouldn't every single person have a flawless, built-in lie detector? Like, we should be absolute experts at reading each other by now. Yet we misinterpret these physical signals constantly.
Well, we misinterpret them because noticing a physical reflex is really only half the equation.
Okay.
Even if a universal biological trigger causes someone's eye to twitch or their arms to cross, the rules governing when, where, and how intensely it's appropriate to display that emotion are dictated entirely by culture.
So you emit the physical cue, but the person sitting right across from you processes it through their own specific cultural operating system.
Exactly.
And if your systems are misaligned, the underlying message is completely corrupted. Which brings us to the work of anthropologist Edward Hall from 1976. He introduced the paradigm of high context versus low context cultures, and understanding the mechanics behind this explains so much of our daily friction.
It really does. So a low-context culture, like the United States, for example, generally develops in environments that prioritize individualism. In these systems, you need communication to be highly explicit. The words themselves carry the vast majority of the meaning.
You say exactly what you mean, and you mean exactly what you say.
Right.
So a low-context communicator is essentially just reading the script. But a high-context culture like Guatemala or Japan operates entirely differently. These cultures tend to be more collectivist, where preserving group harmony is prioritized over individual bluntness.
And in a system where blunt language causes social damage, communication naturally evolves to become indirect. The meaning isn't just in the words, it is carried heavily by the stage directions, so to speak. It's in the subtle nonverbal cues, the hierarchy of the speakers, the physical setting, and crucially, what is deliberately left unsaid. So when someone reading the script tries to communicate with someone reading the stage directions, you get massive cultural collisions.
And the cross-cultural guides from the IFES extension in Think Cultural Health, they provide some striking examples of these collisions in practice.
Oh, yeah, they do.
Like, in a low-context, white American setting, maintaining direct eye contact is a metric for honesty and confidence. It shows you're engaged. But if you take that same direct gaze into many Asian cultures, it is processed as aggressive, disrespectful, or defiant.
And we see the same mechanism with volume and expressiveness, too. Loud, highly expressive speech is a marker of passion and active engagement in many African American, Caribbean, and Arab cultures.
Sure.
But in many American Indian and East Asian cultures, softer tones are favored as signs of respect and thoughtful deliberation. Yeah, so if a manager or a clinician evaluates an Arab employee or patient using an East Asian cultural baseline, they might completely misinterpret their enthusiasm as hostility.
Because you are constantly making split-second judgments based on your own default settings.
Yeah.
And nowhere is this cognitive processing more evident than in the very rhythm of conversation. There's this fascinating study from the University of Vienna and Nicholas Copernicus University in Truro that looked at the cognitive mechanics of the conversational pause.
Yeah, they tested exactly how humans react to silence before a response. The researchers played recordings where someone asks a simple favor like, can you make me a coffee, please? Then they manipulated the silence before the person answered yes.
And they tested the difference between a tiny 0.2-second pause and a 1.2-second pause, which, to the human brain, 1.2 seconds of dead air is an eternity.
It really is.
When listeners heard a native speaker pause that long before agreeing to make the coffee, they universally judged the speaker as reluctant. The silence fundamentally changed the meaning of the word yes to. Basically, I will do it, but I really don't want to.
But the researchers found our brains are constantly running complex, subconscious cognitive math. When the person answering was a non-native speaker, when they had a noticeable foreign accent, the listeners completely discarded the reluctance judgment.
Really?
Yeah, they entirely forgave the 1.2-second pause.
Because the listener's brain automatically reattributes the delay to language processing rather than emotional resistance. You hear the accent, you assume they are searching for vocabulary, and you adjust your cultural filter on the fly.
Exactly. Though there was one highly specific exception to this rule.
Oh, what was that?
If the question wasn't a request for a favor, but a factual knowledge question, say, what was the first vegetable grown in space? The accent didn't matter at all. A 1.2-second pause universally signaled low confidence and lack of knowledge to the listener, completely regardless of the speaker's background.
Okay, wait, what was the first vegetable grown in space?
Oh, I believe it was a potato.
A potato, nice.
Yeah.
But seriously, think about your last video call. If someone pauses for just over a second because of a slight lag or a moment of thought, and you don't consciously adjust your baseline, your brain might automatically categorize them as unhelpful or incompetent.
Right.
We are performing this high-wire act of interpreting intentions, biology, and cultural timing every single day. So what happens when we try to offload this deeply human process to a machine?
Well, that transition from human interaction to human-machine interaction exposes exactly how fragile our communication models really are. And this is where the new artificial intelligence benchmarking study, the MMSU, comes into play. MMSU stands for Massive Multitask Spoken Language Understanding and Reasoning.
Because historically, AI has been evaluated using text. You feed a large language model a pristine transcript, and it gives you an incredibly articulate answer. But as we've established, a transcript strips out up to 65% of the actual data.
Exactly.
The MMSU benchmark is designed specifically to test speech large language models or speech LLMs by feeding them raw, authentic audio.
It forces the AI to process audio files filled with sarcastic tones, background noise, crying, yawning, and those pregnant 1.2-second pauses we talked about. The goal is to see if the AI can understand how we speak, rather than just transcribing what we say.
But wait, my voice assistant answers my questions perfectly, almost all the time. Are you saying these highly advanced models are basically deaf to how I'm speaking?
What's fascinating here is, well, yeah, mostly, and this interaction completely triggers the illusion of transparency for us as
Oh,
users.
how so?
When you use an advanced voice assistant, it speaks with perfect inflection. It sounds empathetic and highly capable. So your brain naturally builds rapport, and you assume the machine understands your emotional state just like a human would.
Oh, I see.
Then you say something with a sarcastic tone, the AI gives you a literal tone-deaf response, and you feel incredibly frustrated. We project human phonological perception onto a statistical engine that only truly understands semantic reasoning.
And the MMSU data quantifies exactly how deep this architectural flaw goes. On tests measuring the ability to perceive sarcasm, interpret puns, or understand why a word is being prolonged for emphasis, humans score around 89.7% accuracy.
Which tracks, since our brains are evolutionary machines built to parse those exact acoustic signals.
Right. But how do the most advanced AI models perform?
The current state-of-the-art model, Gemini 1.5 Pro, scores only about 60.7%.
Wow.
And several other prominent multi-billion-dollar models are failing even harder, hovering down in the 30 to 40% range.
That is a massive drop-off. The underlying mechanism causing this failure rate comes down to how these models process data, right?
Yes.
They excel at semantic reasoning, understanding the mathematical relationships between text tokens.
Mm.
If you ask an AI to synthesize a complex legal document based on text, it's brilliant. But they lack phonological perception. They cannot parse the continuous acoustic data of human speech.
Right. The rhythm, the pitch variations, the subtle prosody. AI struggles immensely with basic acoustic perception tasks, like distinguishing between near homophones. Words that sound almost identical but mean different things depending entirely on the context and the speaker's tone.
And if you look at nonverbal noises, the gap gets even wider. If you say, oh, great job, there with a flat, monotonous delivery, followed by a heavy 1.2-second sigh, well, the speech LLM essentially flattens the rich audio into basic text.
Yeah, it just transcribes, oh, great job.
It strips away the sarcasm, it ignores the sigh as irrelevant background noise, and it processes your statement as a sincere compliment.
It is entirely blind to the stage directions. Until engineers figure out a way to train these massive models to mathematically weigh paralinguistic features, the emotion, the cultural pauses, the pitch as heavily as the text tokens, true human-AI interaction is going to be severely bottlenecked. The machine might possess vast stores of knowledge, but it fundamentally does not know how to read the room.
So what does this mean for you as you navigate your day? Let's bring all these layers together. We started our deep dive by dismantling the illusion of transparency. We established that the vivid anxieties and thoughts playing on a loop in your head are fundamentally invisible to the world. You are not as exposed as you think.
Exactly. We then looked at how your truth actually makes its way out through biological hardware, through microexpressions and nonverbal cues.
Right.
But we also saw that relying on those physical cues is dangerous if you aren't accounting for the cultural operating system of the person you are observing. Your personal default setting for eye contact or conversational pacing is not the universal standard.
And finally, we saw that despite our immense technological progress, AI is currently failing to bridge this gap. It can parse our vocabulary with incredible speed, but it is totally deaf to the silent, complex dance of human context.
The practical application of all this research is really about adjusting your cognitive anchors. First, you can relieve a tremendous amount of your own social anxiety simply by remembering that people cannot hear the song in your head.
That is huge.
Yeah. And second, you can vastly improve your professional and personal relationships by actively questioning your own cultural baseline before you judge someone else's silence, tone, or lack of eye contact.
It requires a deliberate effort to give each other more grace. But I want to leave you with a forward-looking twist to mull over, drawn directly from our sources at the Decision Lab.
Oh, the Brain-to-Text project.
Yes. Right now, neuroscientists at the University of Texas are developing a non-invasive AI system designed to literally translate human brain activity into a continuous stream of text.
A technology that directly abstracts the internal monologue, bypassing the mouth entirely.
Exactly. So think about the implications of that for a second. If technology eventually allows us to bypass the physical body entirely, If we can project our raw thoughts straight to text without ever needing to speak, what happens to the art of the unsaid?
That's a great point.
Without our clumsy cultural filters, without our involuntary micro-expressions, without those tense 1.2-second pauses, do we actually communicate more efficiently? Or do we lose the very friction that makes human connection meaningful in the first place?
That is a really profound question to consider.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the signals around you, listen closely for the unsaid, and we will catch you next time.